All right, here's an update on the car. I guess this is going to be a little bit of a surprise that it's in this state. Basically, I had a camera failure. I lost the footage that I shot. So I've got some stills, and I'll try to piece together some of it as I went through, and I've got a little bit here and there that I managed to recover. But here's where we are now. They've got the cards have been rebuilt. They still need to be adjusted. A couple things tightened up. These are overflows. I didn't know where they went, so I just made them long, but apparently they go, this one goes across here, joins up with the front one, and goes down that way. You can see the valve covers on. I just got this is the water pump down here. The thermostat housing is right here. Thermostat's inside. This is a bypass. I put a restrictor plate in here, so it's only about a 1/4 inch there. And then I moved the, I think you can see it from the top. Let's see. Yeah. So the thermostat's now at the top, and you can probably just make out the sleeve that I pressed in on top to hold that down in place. Here's the generator. Distributor's in. Distributor's been rebuilt, so I got to make some plug wires. Couple things need to be safety wired. Got the oil filter covered together. Got the oil filter in it. So I think that I'm pretty close now to taking this off the stand, putting the pressure plate, clutch, bell housing, etc. on. The gearbox is right over there. There's the starter, air filters for the carbs, the drive shaft, the check straps in the back. Can't really put those on until I get the engine weight in it. Now we look at the chassis. You can see brake lines are on. Everything's pretty much completed on that. I still need to bleed the brakes. The fuel line is run. I got these pedals in. Here's a pro tip for you. Before you put these guys in, you have to put this boot on. Because once you get them in, they're spread out at the top and you can't get that rubber boot on. And those things are not easy to get in, so I've done that basically twice. Rebuilt the master cylinder. It works well. Still need to bleed everything. You got the front suspension together. Your brake lines run across here. Those are new brake lines. Those are nickel copper mix of some sort. It's supposed to last longer. The fuel line up there. See the transmission mount right there, or gearbox mount. You've got the engine mount up front. So basically, as soon as we get the gearbox on the back of the engine, will be able to, I'm going to just hoist it from right there, roll the car under it, let it down, and set it in place. Then we'll go ahead and put the firewall on and wire things up. And the plan at this point is to go ahead and get at least the tub on, and put in the floor and some seating temporarily, and drive it. We'll be able to get at least just in the neighborhood up and down the street, get some miles on it, make sure everything is running just right. While I can still get to the engine easily, I can still get to all the suspension easily, and get that dialed in, and then test fit all the panels, prep them for paint, get them painted. And that'll be a wrap on that. I'm thinking probably 2.5, 3 months. I'd love to have it done by the end of the year. We're September 10th today, so I think it's somewhat reasonable. We'll see. Alright, so we're going to start working on all the chassis and suspension parts. These obviously have been cleaned up some and taken off the car. That one still has the shoes on it. You can see this one's taken off. These are in good shape, but of course, all the rubber's bad. But we have a complete suspension rebuild kit that take every single thing apart and replace it. So the first thing we're gonna do is, like us, take all of this apart, clean what we need to, blast what we need to, and get that ready for paint. The suspension, I didn't film this because this is boring as watching paint dry and painful as well. So I media blasted this. Turned out really good, but really that's just because this was already in great shape. Here it is. Parts car, donor car, has been donating. Donated a lot. The last thing we're going to really use it for, we will eventually take everything off. I've been looking at the frame rails underneath, and they've got some serious issues. So I'll have to evaluate if it can even be saved at all. This is the engine from it. Of course, as I noted before, everything was stuck solid. I'm down to just one piston left to get out, so that's good. The biggest thing that I'm using this for is all the routing for the wires, all the tabs, everything is on here, as this was basically untouched over the years. Touched by weather, that's for sure. But it's great for getting the exact original detail on how everything was run. The original fuel line still here, and it's run down the rails. Same thing with the wiring harness. I've got a lot of good pictures in the video where I took this apart. But eventually I get and take all of that, everything off, and evaluate the frame to see if it can be saved. If it can, we will. If not, I'll clean, prime all these parts and sell them. Unless, of course, I'll find another TD. All right, let's get cleaning. All right, a quick shot of how this fits on. So you've got this piece of rubber here, and that is down in. You can see that it has a little groove. Now it sits in the groove, and then that rides on this bushing that goes through, so you can push it out the other side. See, it comes out this side, and then there's that the piece of rubber from the other side. And then if you don't know, these screw, you can see that it's adjusting how high it sits on that. Turn it this way. Just make that it's coming back this way. Oh, this would be a lot more evident here. See it moving in. Yeah, and see it moving out there. Okay. All right, and so taking this piece off and take this center section out. I just got these nuts and powder pins on the end. And then, like I said, we've got all new bushings and rubber to do a complete rebuild on this. So we'll keep taking it apart, and I'll jump in with any details. Just a quick shot here to show how this fits in. These two go inside here, and they sort of meet in the middle. And then you've got this on the end that goes just before the nut. So essentially this goes on, this goes on, this goes in, and it goes here, and then you tighten the nut down. So that's how that works. All right, so things are going pretty good. We've got the frame painted. I'm real happy with the satin sheen. I like gloss, but these frames didn't come that way from the factory, so the satin sheen, it shall be. So we're getting ready to put pieces on it, parts. There's the front suspension. But if you look, you'll notice we're missing one thing, and that is the dampers, the front shocks. And that's because stamper sitting here on the workbench, and it has this crazy contraption attached to it. Short of it is I'd sent the other shocks away to a place to have them rebuilt. They could not be rebuilt. That is nearly $50 to send them up there. A little 10 days to find out they couldn't be rebuilt. So I was going to send these up, but then that would be another $50 in shipping to go up. Another 10 days to find out whether they could be rebuilt or not. I'd asked how to check. The short of it was you couldn't. I decided to take these apart and look at them to see how they looked. Let's see if we can get some light in here. Not really, but the cylinders look fine, pistons look fine, movement looks good. Of course it leaks, and that's due to the oil seals that are in here. Now, to get those out and replace them, you have to push this shaft out. So you've got tension here on this shaft. The shaft goes through the center. You have like a cam, a centric movement. It pushes the pistons this way or that way, depending on what part of rotation the shaft is in, and then of course it's pressed in on the other side. So you've got three things that are resisting you trying to push this out. So I think the thing to do, rather than supporting it on the arm on the other end, is to support it, rotate it over here, to support it on the base and push just two forces, two resistance out, and have the shaft come out with the arm on it. And so obviously if I'm going to push here in the center and this is going to resist it, it's just going to rotate. You can look at it from the side. The idea being that the force is going to come down this way. When it does, it's being resisted here, and it's going to get this rotation movement here. So the idea is it needs to be supported here. I tried putting, actually I've got it upside down, but it needs to be supported here. So I tried putting bolts in, but they would just bend, even grade 8, nothing. So the idea is that as it rotates, it will push this way, which will push this toward that. It will then be resisted by, it's not just a bolt, that's the steel shaft that it's going through, the hollow shaft obviously. And then that will resist rotation on this, which should kick the force back, keep everything stable, and let me push this down. So with that said, that's my hopes and dreams. Couldn't see any other way of doing it, so we'll give it a shot. All right, so it seems to set in there pretty well. The rotation is resisted pretty much. Only a couple cranks here, so let's give it some more. Hey, pops are good. Yeah, so that definitely has come out one. Oh yeah, so it's moving through pretty easily now. Resisting a little bit. No, easy. There we go. All right. So that's that. So it took a pretty crazy contraption to get in there, but that was definitely worth the time. All right, so we'll press the rest of this out and kind of go over how that shock works. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. This is the other shock. Obviously, I haven't media blasted this one yet. What you have, you see how the arms go on. And then you can see our shaft here. That arm goes on right there, and that on the other one. And then see this part right here goes on that little guy right in the middle. And when this shaft turns this way or that way, it pushes these pistons this way or that way. And then the pistons, I have to dive into these a little bit more later. You can sort of see it. Okay, hopefully this shows up better than I see it right now. But there is there's sort of a hole in the side of the cylinder, right on this side, and you can see the piston. Certainly you can see it on that side, and hopefully let's walk out over here so you can get some light down in that side. Okay, so yeah, you should be able to see that hole there, or the sort of the channel as it goes down the side. And so that basically what that's doing is restricting or letting the oil bypass this piston comes out, and the amount it can bypass, and how quickly it controls how these pistons move back and forth. And then I think you can see here, yeah, okay, so right there, that's going to adjust up and down the amount of where that channel can come in. So it essentially adjusts the amount of the flow of the oil, which then in turn changes the characteristics of the shocks. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and get all the others up to the same stage. So media blast this one and the two rears, and then we'll go ahead and pull these out. Make sure the pistons are fine. I think at the spring in here, if you can see, yeah, there we go, perfect. So you've got a circlip, a little retainer, and then a spring. It sort of looks like, you know, like a clock spring. And then underneath it, if you can just make out a little piece of metal in there. And I think what that is a bypass. I think maybe, yeah, I'm guessing, but I think maybe as the pistons move faster, maybe that is a bypass. And I believe that that was what was destroyed on the shocks that I sent up to have rebuilt. So I look forward to taking that out and getting a better look at it. Alright, so unfortunately, I've had the, with this one, I just finished media blasting it, as you probably saw. This bolt's stuck as well. With the other one, the way it was stuck, I had taken this one off and I tried to turn this, and I used an impact wrench, and it just twisted that and broke it in the middle. The somewhat good part of that is that this, it was turned around the other way. Oh no, no it wasn't. So it broke off here. And so, okay, so it was the same way. So turned this with an impact wrench, it broke off inside here, and then I was able to pull that off, and then of course press this out. And then I was left trying to get that out. And you would think simplifying the problem there by just having this little part to press out. It just didn't happen. I eventually had to drill it out. I managed to get, you know, I wouldn't say lucky, but I took forever indicating it to get it right down the middle, around a 1/4 inch through it. It popped out almost perfect. Then when I ran to 3/8, I loosened the vise just a little bit, and it sort of hunted a little bit and found it exactly. And about right as it was getting maybe about here, I noticed that everything that came out was sort of black. And that was the rust that I had been trying to dissolve, and then rust started coming up, and then at that point the whole thing pushed out. So I ended up really going right down the bolt and getting it out. So, which was great, but it's going to be hard to do the second time. I'm probably going to throw this back in a jug of the rust stuff, and see if it can get down in there and eat some of that out. Put a little coil in the middle as well, and just see if that can come out. I really don't want to go through drilling out again. I'd hate to have to get that right twice. Okay, so I got an idea. I think I'd read this somewhere. So I put this in the vise. I tried to impact wrench, and sure enough, as it hit this, it turned a little bit, but the bottom didn't. So I sort of went forward, backwards, forward, backwards, forward, backwards, and I turned it, and I didn't get anywhere. So then what I did was I heated the area up down here with a torch, not a acetylene, but just a handheld propane or Matte Pro torch, and got it really hot. And then I took that out and poured water over the bottom. That's one reason I didn't want to use a acetylene torch. I didn't want to get it so hot when I pour water on it, it might crack. And then went back with the impact wrench, and we win. It came right out. So it did work. I've heard that getting it really hot and then quenching it, but not so hot that when you quench it, it would crack the casting. So you have to be careful about that. So joy. I don't have to go through that drilling out again. Just a quick video getting ready. We're gonna paint this. Still haven't gotten it all cleaned. Note the TD on here, and note how that's a line, and then the D with the break there, and then the T. And it's interesting that they're really spaced. You just sort of light and hot in the middle, kind of haphazard. So the TD being read correctly, then this is the right side. And then I've taken the axle out, and it's the one that has two on the inside. It has two red slashes on it, and then the left side they had put just one red slash on it. So that's how you know which way they go back. So we're gonna go ahead and get this cleaned up and prepped. I actually probably do that tomorrow when we start painting everything at once. Okay, so getting close to paint again. They keep getting closer and closer. You notice that these are kind of the light metal color, and these are darker. You can see this here. So my normal process is to do the media blasting, and then I hit everything with phosphoric acid metal prep and etch. But the epoxy primer that I'm using, the gentleman that created it, it's SPI, it's Barry, doesn't like this on the surface. He says that the epoxy doesn't kick off and cure with the phosphoric acid on it. You can reactivate it and wipe it off and whatnot, but that's kind of a pain. So what I've been doing is blasting everything as normal, going back with the phosphoric acid on it, letting that, wiping it off, letting it sit for a day, and then going back and blasting it all again. And that way I can get everything off. I found that the phosphoric acid just gets down in there in the pits, you can see on this piece, and get some of that rust out that's a little harder to get, even with the fine grit, to get down in there and get it. So I'll go back over this, and you see it's easy to tell which has been done and which hasn't, and knock all that back off, and then go and do the primer. So there's only a few parts left that have to have that done. I've got my little trees here. I made these. I'll be taking these out and putting some 2x4s across the top and hanging everything from it, and that's where I'll be painting all the parts from. Alright, so the parts card is gone. I think every chassis part has been painted. Frame's painted. Engine parts are painted. I think just about everything. Got a generator needs to be painted. And it's now assembly time, which is awesome. So we are starting the steering rack. A couple interesting points on this. You can see this nice grease fitting that goes on the front, but it's not for grease. Not at all, even though this came packed with grease. I found out it's not grease. It's probably 90 weight, 80, 90 weight. That's what the gear oil is what the manual suggested. So we're gonna be putting oil back in it this instead of the grease. Has a neat system here. You see the this guy runs down like that. You got the steering gear here, and then that gear goes down and runs along the rack. And when it does that, it has a little a damper, I think they called it. This little guy on the spring pushes down on the top of this right here to keep the rack and the pinion together. That's pretty neat. And it's got some instructions for measuring that, and then there's a couple shims on this. I think this one came with 2 on it, so we will measure and make sure that that's right and it doesn't need another one. And the same thing, this one has the 2 shims that they mentioned for holding this end here. And so we'll make sure that that cap goes on right here. This sits down in that, and that keeps the play this way. So we'll be measuring those things. We'll put the fitting back in, fill it with oil instead of grease. I got the nice new rubber boots. These are just painted, they're fine. I measured the end play in these, it's still very good. And then we've got, these are new on the end. And we'll put those on. It is an interesting question as to what happened to this car and why was it restored, I'm saying taken apart to be restored, because the wear in this area right here should be significant for its age, and it's not. Put a straight edge on it, it really isn't even discernible wear. And then there's a you see this shaft goes in here. You got this diameter, and it goes in right in here. And the shaft is hardened, but this casting is not. And so you get wear in this area. And I measured those, and it's not worn. One of the common things to do is to bore this out and sleeve it. But that didn't have any issues. So you kind of wonder how the car got to this age. It's been disassembled, I think, for maybe 25 or 30 years. And doesn't really have that much wear on it. And I have found that through the rest of the chassis pieces that I've been going over, measuring, in float, and it just doesn't really seem to have the wear on it that the car should have at this age. But that's good. I've been plating the bolts, nuts and bolts, trying to get a cadmium lookalike finish. You can see that is a zinc plating, but it doesn't quite have the look of zinc, which is what I wanted. I wanted to get it the copycat, I believe is what Caswell calls it. So I wanted to get that look on it, so it didn't look like we had modern zinc bolts on it. And those are all the original nuts and bolts. So it's going back together that way. All right, well, enough drabbling on. Let's get this going. Working on the master cylinder for the brake system. Sort of got lucky, got a really nice one. This one's original, was in very good condition. Not a lot of pitting or any problems down in the cylinder, good shape, no cracks. So I've cleaned this up and painted it, and then I got this little honing stones to go down in and hone this bore some. So we'll get that done, and then we should have the rebuild kit coming probably tomorrow, and be able to get this piece redone and put aside. So it turned out great. All right, so I got the hone done. Let's see if we can get the light to go down in there. Really happy with how that turned out. I mean, it was fine to begin with, but it's nice to get a nice even finish on it all the way down there. Hopefully this shows up on the big screen. I can't really see that much through the camera, but you can look down in there and feel down in that bore, and it's nice and smooth. So this is great. We got the rebuild kit in hopefully tomorrow and get this put back together. It'd be nice to have a nice original Lockheed master cylinder on the car. All right, so getting ready to put the coil springs in. Actually, I've already done this once. Put the coil spring in here. I've got a jack under the trunnion, and then since I don't have the engine in, I've got this support here that runs up to a beam it goes across the shop. It got in, and I noticed it didn't really sit well in here, and I went out to the parts car and found that that this guy goes in here, up under here, and then that sits, that sort of holds or locates the spring in the top. So I looked around, I got the one off the parts car. This is not it. It was in pretty rough shape. But I looked around in my parts. I sort of had noticed this, and I had two of these. So I wasn't sure if it was painted or if it had been plated in the past. I figured that the zinc plating would probably be the best for it, given its location there. So I went and plated these in the bolts. We're going to put that on, then get the coil springs in, and that should complete these assemblies in the front, and go ahead and put the backing plates on with the brakes, and get the wheel bearings in the wheels and put them on. And then we will have at least at the front of the car on wheels. So that'll be a great accomplishment. Okay, so I just thought I'd shoot a quick little video and show how I'm planning on doing this. So I've got the jack under here that sit on the bottom of the trunnion, and push this up. I had the spring just clipping in that one side of the holder there in the pan, and of course the spring up in the top is held in place by that little dish that I've added. So I shoot video of this, but it's a multi-hand job, and I only have two. As you jack this up, the car wants to go that way. It's just sitting on little jack stands right now. So you kind of get your hands full until the jack starts getting the car up, and then it hits this, and this goes up. I've got a beam that goes across the shop, and I've got that connected to that beam. And so that will keep the frame from going up and provide some resistance. It should be able to get that spring in. All right, so we got that pressed in. It's pretty easy. This goes pressed all the way down flush with the inside. Oil seal goes on top there. Again, this spacer here, this goes up against the backing plate, or where the spindle goes in. And then you can see this little raised area here is going to run on the inner race of the bearing there. So that goes in like that. Flip it over, put the outer bearing in, and that will be done. Pretty easy. All right, so on the other side, you can see the spacer. That's this piece right here, and then the inner part of that rides on that inner race. You press that down in there. And we have this will go on, and then the nut, and then you've got the hub cap, which is an actual correct use of the term, other than some of our HUD caps these days. All right, so we'll press that in. This will be done the other one, and put them on the car. It'll be great. We'll get the tires on pretty soon. Well, alrighty. So that makes me pretty happy. It's been a long stretch to get to this point. A lot of issues, a lot of things to do, but excited to get here. So it's only half the car on the ground, but that's better than none of the car on the ground. So the rear axle should go pretty quick. I think we have everything assembled, or not assembled, but gathered and ready to put everything together. So I'm pretty excited about that. So there you go. One half of the car on the ground. Alright, so now we need to press this bushing in the shock link here. But the problem is, as you can clearly see, the bushing is bigger than the hole that it goes in. So what we have is two little pieces that I turn on the lathe to fix that. So this will go in here, snap down in there, and then its ID at the top is large enough to have the bushing in it, and then it narrows all the way down to where it'll put the bushing as we press it straight in, go in there. And then we've got one at the bottom that does two things. One, it holds it still, and then two, you can see it goes up in the bottom here, and it limits how far the bushing goes in. So try to snap this in here with one hand. It's sort of the ultimate in how easy this is to use. If I can do this while holding the camera. Alright, so I need to move it over just a little bit. Alright, let's try again. Yeah. Alright, I'm going to hold it here. Let's see, do this. There we go. Alright. And then that pushes right out the bottom. And it's down in the bottom link now. That's pretty good. You can push it down a little bit further. Kind of hard to do with just one hand. All right, there. So now that's in. Now we've got. You turn this over again. Alright, so we're going to start putting the bottom end of the engine together. I was noticing a lot of people talking about how difficult it is to get the pistons in. These pistons have to go in from the bottom because the end of the connecting rod is bigger than the hole there. Getting the pistons past the crank. So I think I'm going to go ahead and set all the pistons in with no rings and push them through. They'll be all the way down. And then I'll be able to put the crank in. I can then turn the engine over. You put the rings in and then push them back down from the top. It seems to be that's the best way of doing it. Getting a ring compressor down in here with the crank in there is going to be pretty much impossible. I've already gone and checked all the bearings. Everything is great. Right dead smack in the middle of what we wanted. So that's fantastic. Both the main bearings and the big end of the connecting rod bearings are good. So we're ready to get this thing together. So I'm going to go ahead and build. Also building the pistons. When you put the connecting rod down in the piston, it's going to go around this pin that's in the center, and then you see this sort of detent in here. That's where the bolt goes down to the small end of the connecting rod, and then that keeps the pin positioned in the piston. But you can't, when you go to tighten that bolt, obviously you can't put the piston in a vise because you'd scratch the piston. And if you hold the connecting rod by the other end, you can bend the connecting rod. So they suggest you make 2 of these guys. So I made these on the lathe real quick. And you put them in on each end. Obviously the pin's in the cylinder when you do this. In the piston. And then that way, you would see this would stick out just outside the piston. And you can put the piston in a vise without touching the sides of the piston and hold this pin still. And then that way you can tighten down on that pin without either damaging the piston or twisting the connecting rod. So we're going to go ahead and get those put together, slide them all down in there, put the crank in, put the bearings on, flip it around, and put the rings in. Alright. Okay, so I realized that was probably hard to understand, but you can see there's the little tapered rod that we made. It goes on each end, and then it's holding the pin that goes through the center of the piston, and then that way this piston is being supported only by its pin in the center. And so when we go and put this bolt in, and torque it down, we won't be twisting the connecting rod. Because if you held it, you know, from this end of the connecting rod and twisted it down, it would be a problem, and obviously you can't really hold it by the piston. So that's what that's are. I think in hindsight, if I made these again, I would, on the end of that taper, I would leave maybe, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch turned down just to go just inside those pistons, because as it was, I had to tape them in place because I only have 2 hands and I ran out of hands trying to get that in the vise. So I'd probably continue with that taper, but then leave 1/4 inch at a smaller diameter so you could just stick that in there. All right, things are going pretty well. A couple notes on the reassembly. There's a plate up here on the front. You need to make sure you have that in before you put the crank in. I got the bearings on, and like I said, this time I fitted all the pistons and their connecting rods in there. And now I'm going and putting the rings on and then pressing them through. These rings, all right, so here's the oil control ring, and there's one thin ring there. So first of all, you put this middle spacer ring in first. Then you put one of the thin rings on one side and one of the thin rings on the other side. And then you put the 2 compression rings on top. Put the ring compressor on and just tap it through. It's pretty easy. You do want to make sure before you start tapping it through that you have the piston oriented correctly, so that the connecting rod's not hitting the crank. And then one more detail, and this is mentioned several places, but so in the connecting rod, let's see if I can get in there. Okay, so you can see this one is tilted. You've got this little hole here where the oil comes in and out here. This, it's important, comes out the other side, that it faces away from the camshaft. I think a lot of engines actually want to have it spray at the camshaft. This engine is supposed to be away from the camshaft. You make sure you get that right. All right, getting ready, just about to button this thing up. It's going on pretty well. All right, another couple quick notes. I'm not sure if I missed this in the disassembly or not, but so the cam runs down along here, and you have these 2 bolts here that have well, basically they hold these 2 bearings in place, and so the end of the bolt has a little nub on it. And then these are wired, a safety wire, and you can see the cam bearing here. I haven't put, yeah, there we go. I haven't put the core plug in yet. You need to make sure when you put that in, you're able to run the bolt down into that, hold it in place. They held in place here, and then at the front, it's got this guy that goes on, to keep the to keep it from going back this way. So that holds the bearings for the cam in place. So we're getting ready to put the timing gears on, and I'll make a couple short notes on that once we've got that going as I get that set up.